Hi everyone, I'm Deb Noller. I'm the CEO of Switch Automation. Our company builds smart building solutions for large portfolios of real estate. So our clients tend to be large enterprise running corporate real estate, or it could be owners and occupiers of commercial real estate. But if you've got lots and lots of buildings, you basically have the same problem, which is data strewn all over your organisation. It's in systems, it's in subsystems, it's in spreadsheets, it's in databases sitting on people's desktops, and one of the big problems is how do you harness all of that data and bring that together so that you can make great decisions for your business. So 5 years ago I came to the US at the beginning of 2013, and there was absolutely no such thing as prop tech. It wasn't a term that had been coined yet. Most of the real estate owners, most of the tenants, most of the service companies really weren't very interested in what this thing was about disrupting, upsetting or transforming real estate. And the investors particularly were disinterested in this space. And now if you fast forward to 2018, we now have a term for this thing. It's called prop tech. It spans an enormous amount of different technologies. And last year alone in 2018, there was over $3 billion from the US investment community put into prop tech. So it's definitely now something that's on the radar of most companies that are either owning or operating in real estate, but it's also an enormous target of interest for most of the investment community. So the big question is, you've got all of this data and you can bring it all together, but will it really do anything interesting for your organisation? And I think the term for this event today is DisruptCRE, and I think the disruption of data actually has a lot more to do with the way people will generate really interesting business models and new revenue streams out of that data. So to talk to the panel, the one before last, they were saying, you know, people are just collecting this data. They don't really know what they're going to do with it yet. But the really smart people have understood that the power of this data is going to give them a competitive edge in the future. So there's a really large warehousing company that services companies like Amazon and Walmart and Whole Foods. Over 10% of their GDP, of the country's GDP, goes through those warehouses, and the CEO of that company has challenged his organisation to think about how the value of that data is actually going to be more interesting and more valuable in the future than the real estate itself. So I think that kind of thinking is exactly why most people have turned this corner and are starting to pay particular interest in building data and what it can tell them. The challenge, of course, is if you've got lots of buildings, you have buildings that were built in different eras. They have different systems, they have different architectures, they have all sorts of different systems. Even just if you're talking about lighting systems, every building will have a different lighting system. And depending on when those systems were released, they'll have different protocols. And then you add to that situation the plethora of new IoT devices and smart field devices that are coming into the market that are using even newer protocols like Sigfox and LoRa, and you've got a situation that's actually really hard to solve for. The other problem, the previous panel alluded to that, is cybersecurity risk. Cybersecurity is not actually a risk going forward. Most of the systems that are coming out into the market today have to pass the stringent of cybersecurity reviews. Most of your cyber risk is actually in what happened in the last 20 years, not what's going to happen in the next 20. So most buildings today do have some element of cyber risk. And then you add to that the fact that traditional IT people have bought systems for single buildings. They haven't actually had to buy IT solutions for their entire organisation. So they have a very different way of buying and a different way of putting those solutions through procurement. So we actually have to educate that group of people about how to buy technology for buildings. Luckily, the cyber big cyber question has brought the IT people into the room, and so we now have OT people and IT people sitting together at the table, normally involved in the procurement process. So it's a really complex ecosystem that you're navigating, and most people in real estate who are looking at prop tech, I shouldn't say most people, some people in prop tech, in real estate that are looking at prop tech are doing what I call the bright shiny thing theory, which is they're trialling 15,000 different technologies to see which ones return value for their organisation. But it's not very strategic, and it doesn't actually move the needle, because what you're doing is you're just trialling 15 things here and 15 things there, and at the end of next year you'll be in exactly the same place as you are today. If you take an IT approach, what you have to do is do a fundamental and foundational strategic approach to this. So what that means is looking for, by all means trial, there's nothing wrong with trialing. Most companies will trial things to make sure that they work. But here's the thing about a trial. Any company can make one building work. Any company can make 5 buildings work. Any company can make 10 buildings work. We would literally throw all of our team at any trial that had 10 buildings on it, and we would make that work. The big question for all of you is to look very closely at the deployment of those technologies to make sure that it scales. And by scale, I mean it has to scale in the deployment, it has to scale in the pricing, it has to scale in the onboarding of all of your staff and your contractors. So it's a really important thing that just because something works in proof of concept or pilot stage doesn't necessarily mean that it will scale. You have to be able to accommodate portfolio changes, because your transactional team will buy and sell buildings, and before you know it, you're going to end up with inconsistent systems. So even if you decided you were using consistent equipment across your entire portfolio, even if you did a whole capital upgrade and made all of those systems match, you guarantee that in 3 years' time, with the buying and selling of several buildings, you'd be back to the same position. So you have to be able to accommodate changes in your portfolio, and you have to be able to accommodate changes in your technology stack. So what I mean by that is every layer of your technology stack should be able to be swapped in or swapped out without any denigration to the integrity of the rest of the architecture. The last thing that you want is you get to the end of a deployment, you find a better sensor, and you find out that everything that you've installed over the last 3 years has to be ripped out and started again. If you find a new sensor, all the rest of your technology stack should maintain its integrity. You need to provide a variety of methods for data ingestion, because you're going to have data that's coming from third parties, from vendors, B2B integrations from other systems, as well as all of your on-premise systems and devices. You should be supporting all of the existing industry standards. So in our world, that would be brick, that would be haystack, but there's also going to be future standards that we haven't even seen yet, and so you have to make sure that your solutions that you're picking will also support future standards. Auto-validating incoming data. If you put garbage in, you'll get garbage out, and that one doesn't need any more explanation. Normalising data. What that means is if I wanted to do people counting across a portfolio of buildings, I might be getting people counting data from turnstiles, from card swipe, from people counters, and you want to be able to compare that data like for like. So normalising data means that you can take any data set, and it doesn't matter where the source was, you can compare it with other data. And you need to make sure that this data that you're collecting and putting into some sort of hosting environment will actually service all the needs of your organisation. So you might be starting on the smart building journey with energy management or fault detection or people counting and space utilisation, but there will be enormous amounts of people in your organisation that will actually be able to make really well-informed decisions out of that data. So it's about how you're going to share that data with everybody in your organisation. And finally, where innovation comes from, it's the collaboration. When you let people collaborate and around technology, that's where the magic happens, and that's where you'll get the innovation. So it's about being able to expose what you're doing as a strategy, expose your data with your organisation and your vendors and your technicians, and what you'll find is that the real innovation will come from your teams. So in summary, by all means trial technologies, but the really most valuable thing that you can do for your organisation, and it doesn't take very much work, is to develop a really solid foundational data strategy for your organisation. So what that means is, where are you going to host your data? Are you going to put it on premise? Are you going to put it in a private cloud? Are you going to put it in a public cloud? How are you going to be able to protect that data for business continuity, intraday backups? What happens if the data center burns down? How are you going to protect your data forever and a day? And it doesn't take very long for these data stores to build up into petabytes of data. So you have to think about, what if I want to move that data one day? How difficult will that be if it's petabytes? Obviously, coming up with a cybersecurity strategy, it goes hand in hand with that. Thinking about how you're going to protect that data, thinking about how you're going to share that data. If you're going to share that data with technicians or third parties or vendors, what's your onboarding and your offboarding process? And then if you're in specific locations, you really have to think about data privacy in a way that you've never had to think about this before. So GDPR is becoming increasingly important in North America. Obviously, if you're going to collect any kind of personal information, you have to think about the privacy of that data in a way that's much, much different to, say, energy data. Also, if you're in some locations, you have to think about data sovereignty. So, for example, Canada has really strict data sovereignty laws. So it's not a hard thing. It probably will only take your team about a month to pull this together, but it will absolutely service your company and your business well all the way into the future as you adopt more and more smart building technologies. Any questions? I'll be at the table at the back and happy to answer any of those questions. So thank you.